until I was 18, I didn't like math. I was like good at it. I wasn't the best, but I was good. But I hated it because I think that the word that functioned the best to it is like c'est la science des ânes. Like some people call it like the donkey's discipline, because you just like apply formulas. And that's
Mm.
how I saw it. I saw it as like, oh, you just learn, like that's how you do it, and then like you just do it. It's like applying a recipe. And I hated these kind of math. And my passion for math came when it became something more. It's when we started saying, okay, like, great, you know how to solve the question, but we don't care about that. We want you to tell us, why does it work? Not just how it works, but why does it work? And that's when like I felt like, it's as if like you have like some kind of machinery working on the table, and then like you start looking below, like
Mhm.
what's the engine? Like,
And you have control of the
And measure what the effect of this will be.
different types of
Welcome everyone. In this video, we are going to start with something new for 2021, a podcast series. And I'm very glad to start this year with a very good friend of mine, a fascinating researcher, Charles Ayoubi. And you already seen him sometimes in the background and on several videos. So I'm very glad to share a discussion with him and with all of you today. So Charles has a PhD in economics from EPFL in Switzerland, and he's now a research fellow at the Laboratory of Innovation at Harvard University. So welcome, Charles. Great to start the year and this new project on the channel with you. Really, really glad. So how are you already?
I'm good. Thank you, Quentin, for inviting me. I mean, it's an amazing pleasure and honor to be the first guest of your podcast. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Great. So what we are going to talk about on this very first podcast will be first your backgrounds, then your research, then scientific research broadly, because you do quite a lot of research on scientific research. So I think it's such a topic that's unknown that it's very interesting to discuss your research related to that, but also the big picture, and kind of try to lift this veil and show to a broader audience what is it all about research, what are the limitations potentially, and so on and so forth. And let's start really by your background. Where do you come from? What have you done before doing a PhD and so on?
Oh, so okay. So my background is a bit complex. So I did most of my studies in Paris, and so I did like the if you're familiar with the French system, the grande école system, starting with the prépa, doing a lot of math. I fell in love with math actually after high school. I didn't like math before high school, but then when I did it in prépa, we went so deep into the details that I really liked it. And then, so I did this double degree between engineering and business. I always was hesitating between social sciences and hard sciences. And I ended up like working in an energy company. So EDF, Électricité de France in France, the biggest power company in the world, actually, a number of employees. And very quickly, I realized I wasn't happy. So like this kind of industry life wasn't for me. I always liked, what I liked the most about my job was doing things I wasn't supposed to do, which is trying to understand why we're using these formulas. Because so I was working on predicting power demands in France. And so we used like preconceived formulas, like we had to use things like I was on Excel all day. And all I was interested in is like, why do we use that? Where does this like prediction come from? What's like the formula behind it? And my boss was like, that's not your job. Just like run the numbers, like just do your codes, run the numbers, give me the things, do your slides. It was all Excel, PowerPoint, Excel, PowerPoint. And I got really frustrated. I was like, no, I want to do more.
Mhm.
And then I kept on like being surprised by one thing. It's that every weekend I used to still teach. So I was teaching students in prepa, and I also like was teaching for underprivileged people in the
Mhm.
suburbs of Paris, giving them math classes for entering university.
Mm.
And I would wake up like even earlier than for my job. And be like, wow, that's amazing. I was super excited, like just to teach math or even some physics. and then like I would go to my job and like struggle to wake up in the morning. I was like, okay, maybe there's something to do
Yeah,
here.
very good.
And that's when I decided to apply for a PhD. I was like, yeah, maybe I need to do research, and it was a good call.
Hmm. Where did you apply? You applied several places. Was it a long process, or how did you get to Lausanne EPFL?
So actually, it was a very like kind of random process because I had like really the profile for industry. Like I did like
Mm.
an engineering school where like all the sponsors of the school were like industry companies. Same for like the business school. Really, like the purpose of these grandes écoles is to bring you to the big companies. And so like nobody talks about research. Research is this like very shady, uninteresting thing. Like they keep on
Yeah.
telling you. So I also had this vision, like, why I don't want to be like closed in a dark lab where like everything is gloomy and you don't want to go there. But then I started like meeting people. Especially there's one professor who really like influenced me so much. He was so he's a mathematician. He also did some work in economics. His name is Ivar Ekland, and he was also the president of UBC, University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and president of Paris Dauphine in France. And
Hmm.
so I met him. He was a friend of my parents, and it was like a real discovery. He was like the kind of researcher I look up to.
Wow.
Super interesting. You never like you're always learning. He's so passionate about math, about econ, about research, about teaching. And so he's the one who told me, why don't you do a PhD? And so I applied to American universities, but I didn't have the right background because I didn't have any research work.
Mm.
And then my cousin, so like totally random, my cousin was doing a master's in EPFL, and he was
Biology,
like,
or what
he
was?
was in mechanical engineering
Okay.
and doing a minor in management of technology.
Okay.
And he was like, there's like amazing professors in management of technology. Maybe you can go talk to them.
Mm.
So I was on a trip to Switzerland, and he was like, I'll introduce you to this guy and this guy. So I just went to talk to them. And I just clicked with one of the professors who became my supervisor like a few months later.
Wow.
And yeah, the process was a bit chaotic also because they applied online and didn't receive my application. But it ended up all turning all well, and I started my PhD just like 5 6 months later.
So before the PhD, what did you know about economics, like microeconometrics, like really macroeconomics?
So
Where
I
did you
have
learn
like a
those?
very so that's the thing. Like when I was working, I felt this need to like learn more because I was very frustrated with my job. So I applied to two masters actually. So you're going to think I'm crazy, but I applied to like there was this thing called master à distance.
Hmm.
So I was doing two masters where I just go to do the exams. So they just send you all the materials, and you just have to take like 1 week off to do the exams. So I did one master at Université de Jussieu, UPMC in Paris, in math, and a master's of économie des technologies et des territoires in so like technology, like innovation economics in Paris Orsay, Paris 11. And so like that's what I knew basically. It's like I had some statistic backgrounds because my master in math was in probabilities and statistics, and I
Hmm.
loved it
Okay.
because it was like a way to apply the theoretical economics I had done in prépa and in engineering school. So it was a great way to like have something a bit more concrete. And the master in econ, I also did some econometrics and a lot of theory also. So like it's the first time I learned about growth models,
Okay. Okay.
about like asymmetry of information, all the micro models.
So this you learned on your own.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy because we went to doctoral school and it's quite tough and definitely advanced classes, and you were like really understanding and very good in all of those topics. So it's quite impressive. That I didn't know that actually. That's super impressive. Like I was really not surprised. For me, you had really I never thought about it. I knew you were an engineer, but I never connected the dots, realizing that actually how is it possible that you master already all those micro and those type of models? Well, that's super cool, and I
I mean,
think
the math really helps, Like I have a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
things to say about the French system. There's a lot of inequality, it's
yeah,
realist, and there's a lot of problems with it. But if you manage to pass the bar, if you manage to get into the system
yeah.
and do the prépa properly, you're a machine. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a machine. I'm just saying like people who did prépa,
No, that's a
is
fact.
this like they really make you understand how math function, and then like it becomes like a nice like pretty game you can play with, and so it makes economic models much easier to understand
Yeah.
because you know what the tools, how the tools function.
Yeah, I agree, of course, and I think exactly. I think if you the hardest parts in those economic model are the math. So I really think that that's true. If you master that, the jump to master new models within the context of economics is not that big. It's quite impressive, but it's not as big as the reverse. If you understand economics, because you have like a general background, you know qualitatively how it works, and you have to learn the math, this is very costly. And I think that's also illustrated with, in finance now, it's mostly mathematicians. It's not, and people going in PhD in finance, most of the time, or in the wide majority of time, or many people I knew had really just background in math at a really high level, and then just go for finance and apply the concept they learn in finance. But the tricky part and the hard part was to learn the math. And so that's a very good
I
illustration.
mean, both are hard. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
important to say, like, econ is not easy, also as concepts. And I still remember, so we did the program Gersense, so it's the doctoral program. And for me, the tough part were also sometimes like grasping concept that for you were so evident, you know, like there's some intuition, and I see it also today when because I watch your classes at the University of Lausanne, like, with the class that we taught together. And I was always amazed, like, you have a really, like, the way you approached it, the way you like understood and like absorbed these notions was through like a very intuitive econ approach. While like for me, it's more like, oh, we're applying this math tool.
Yeah.
And I think both are very complementary,
Yeah.
and you can't do one without the other. Although I agree that like maybe the leap for getting the math is harder. Like it's really hard if you didn't do it early on.
Yeah, I perfectly agree, and I think that's what's super cool when we exchange together, because you have like a really higher level than myself in math, and I think that's very interesting to always understand deeply those concepts and not just apply them. And so I think.
And you have the higher level in econ, so for me, it's also amazing.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but that's super cool. Something you said quite early is that you were fascinated or passionate by math. What do you like? Can you state? Can you tell? Do you have a way of saying? Sometimes it's
So,
difficult to explain
so
passion.
I mean, no, I can. I think I can totally explain it. There's a few things. The first thing that I think is interesting is until I was 18, I didn't like math. I was like good at it. I wasn't the best, but I was good. But I hated it because I think that the word that functioned the best to it is like c'est la science des ânes. Like some people call it like the donkey's discipline, because you just like apply formulas. And that's how I saw it. I saw it as like, oh, you just learn, like that's how you do it, and then like you just do it. It's like applying a recipe. And I hated these kind of math. And my passion for math came when it became something more. It's when we started saying, okay, you know, like, great, you know how to solve the question, but we don't care about that. We want you to tell us, why does it work? Not just how it works, but why does it work? And that's when like I felt like, you know, it's as if like you have like some kind of machinery working on the table, and then like you start looking below, like what's the engine like. And the thing I loved the most is and people are going to think I'm crazy because I say that, is like in analysis, in real analysis, is topology. So like the whole system. So what's what's a space, what's an arc. So I don't know how to call them in English, but I think like an anu, etc. Like you learn all these like spaces and like the norms and like how you structure the whole space. And also like my favorite thing was linear algebra, when you start describing what's a vectorial space, because then you understand, okay, you know, this thing that you were using, like a function or like a sequence, like u of n plus 1 is equal 3 times u of n. You know, all of these can be summarized into one thing, which is a vectorial space. They all follow the same structure, where like you have like an associative addition, and you have like it's commutative, etc. You just have like a set of very 5 steps, and it applies to everything. And once you know what's a vectorial space, you know so much about the thing. And that's what I loved, is like trying to structure all of that, make sense of all of it, and not just be able to use it. And I think a lot of people today miss that point in math. They just see it as a tool. Like, oh, just tell me how it works. Like, don't really like make me think about like why it works. And so when I teach, I try to really give this perspective. You know, like, why did we invent this tool? What's the background? And also the history. So one of the best classes I had, it's the only class actually that wasn't only files when I was doing the math masters, was a class about history of math. It was with David Aubin, a Canadian professor with an amazing Quebecois accent in French, because it was a class in French. And he was telling the history of math. And I think that's amazing, because we often forget,
Mhm.
why did we invent these tools?
Mhm.
How old they are? Like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
when you're using like geometry and you're just saying, okay, like like if two I don't know, like lines are parallel and there's one that is perpendicular to one, it's perpendicular to the other. Well, that's like 3,000 years old. But when like you're using derivatives, that's like only 300 years old. It's not the same kind of distance. And
Yeah.
there's a reason why some tools are more recent than others. Because they were useful more recently. They also depended a lot on the evolution of physics, astronomy, with Leibniz and Newton, for example, for differential calculus. So I
Mhm.
think giving this background is fascinating, and it doesn't take so much time. Just saying,
Mhm.
like, why do we have cosines? Why do we have all
Yeah.
these like functions that look so fuzzy?
Mhm.
Because at some point we needed to explain how the planets function, how like a boat works, how all these kind of things.
Yeah. I perfectly agree. It made me think we had this discussion about the Cobb-Douglas that we are teaching together to the class. Like I never been taught until doctoral school. Just use this function with some power and something fancy, but it makes so much sense. First, if you learn the history, it's not something random that's fancy in math you want to use. It's because it replicates the reality, and actually they found the function by reverse engineering what they observe in reality. So it makes so much sense. And above that, and exactly linked to what you said, once you understand where it comes from and how it's constructed, it's very simple to remember and to find the solution, because you can, that the power is the proportion you will allocate your revenue. So then you can really have everything in mind very simply. So it's very important. And I think you said something very important as well about math. That's when you talk about math to most of the people who didn't went that far in math, they will think exactly as you said. It's something quite simple. You apply formulas, you get the results. It's boring, and actually, it's very creative. At some point, it gets very. You have to be imaginative to find solutions. You have sometimes several paths to find the solutions, different approaches, and that's, well, statistics is a subfield of math, so clearly it's applying to statistics. And that's really something funny, because when I tell that I'm fascinated by statistics, that I want to teach statistics, what I'm doing, people thinks like, so they think that I will compute means, that I will do things like that, and in some sense, in some extent, it's true, because you compute some means to compute, to show a causal effect of things like that, but it's way more complicated and way more creative and innovative and beautiful and even artistic. So I think that's very interesting, because outside you think, well, it's just boring and kind of not really creative, but there is a lot of life in this topic. So I think it's
People are going to think we're crazy for like saying statistics is artistic. But I mean, you're the one who told me, and I use it. I have to say I use it, even though I always give you credits for it. That like the closest thing to research is the art world.
Mhm.
And so what we're doing is kind of like art, like just a few people understand what you're doing. Like it's
Yeah,
this very like niche thing,
yeah,
and like the process is very similar.
yeah. Yeah, and finding solutions. I mean, when you want to approach causality and you find a solution, this is art. You have to have an idea that's unique, nobody had it before, and find a solution. And for me, it's very creative and hence linked to something artistic, because you also tend to see the beauty of the solution in when you are really into those fields. So that's yeah, that's
Just a funny thought about, you were talking about Cobb Douglas, like the
yeah.
fact that they just give you the function is just these two numbers that you put powers with. And you were saying like there's this math limit. So when I was in engineering school, there was this thing that we used all the time, which was using the Reynolds and the Nusselt. These are like constants, and they're exactly a Cobb Douglas function. because like they're like these two like constant variables, so Reynolds and Nusselt, and you put them at like the power, and the way they were discovered is also by experiments,
Yeah,
and they just like did the logs, and they realized it's always a constant number.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's just funny, and that's also what makes it. When the first time I saw the Cobb Douglas, I was like, oh my god, that's exactly like fluid mechanics. It's the same thing.
Yeah, that's
Like you're like, why would fluid mechanics and economics function similar ways? And that's the beauty of it.
yeah, beautiful parallel here. What did you like, and maybe what will be your pros and cons about the PhD you did personally? What do you think about your life as a PhD candidate? How was it? And yeah.
So I mean, I think there is something very important to be said. I mean, especially for people who are not doing a PhD now. I think one thing is that it's really hard. Like one has to know it might look easy. So like all my friends think I'm always on holidays. That like like I don't have office hours, nobody to like report to, and so it's just freedom. So freedom is true. There is freedom, but it comes at a cost,
Mhm,
and one has to be aware of this cost. And I think PhD is definitely not for everyone. And you see a lot of people really suffering. I mean, we saw it around us. There's a reason why it's one of the professions with the highest depression rate. So I'm not. I just want to say, like,
mhm,
I loved my PhD. It was probably some of the best years of my life, but it's not for everyone. And there's a lot of tough things about it. And so it comes with this very strong trade-off between freedom and, I would almost say, loneliness.
mhm,
Um, that like like you're just like alone with all of this,
mhm,
um, and this like extensive freedom and this absence of clear objectives and
mhm,
short-term objectives. So you have these like very long-term objectives. They tell you like, okay, now you started, we're going to give you some classes, and then here you go, you have 4 years to do a thesis. That's
mhm.
pretty much it. Like you don't
Yeah.
get so much like directions or like where to start, what to
Mhm,
do. You just like read some papers. You see like the final product a lot, but you don't see the process. Nobody's going to show you like half a paper or like half a regression or like half an analysis. Everybody's just showing you final products, and you're like, how did I get there? And so I think it's very important for anybody like considering doing a PhD. I don't know if some of your listeners want to do a PhD, is to really question yourself and ask yourself, how much do I value this freedom and how ready I am for it? So I loved it because I knew I hated office hours. I hated being told, like I used to always be late for my job. Like I had to be there at like 9, and I was always there at 9:05, 9:10. It was never like too much. I never arrived at like
mhm,
9:30, but
mhm.
it was always like 5, 10 minutes late. It's because I didn't like, I was kind of like, why are they telling me to be here? Especially if I don't have a
Yeah.
meeting. Like when I had a meeting, I was like 10 minutes early because I knew why I was here.
Mhm,
And so like I hated that. But some structure is also useful. So like
mhm, mhm,
having a clear objective. When I was like working at a company, like every week you have to do a report, do like a PowerPoint, do a presentation. You have like clear things. In a PhD, it's like so much freedom,
mhm,
and it could be very hard to manage.
mhm.
And I always compare it to an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
your own
Completely
company,
agreed. Yeah.
and so you have to manage everything, and so you
Mhm.
have to learn how to be a manager, which is not always easy.
Yeah, yeah, and usually I said it's the same, but you have the safety of the constant income. So in a sense, in an extent, it's true you have a constant income, but as we most certainly know, you have to fight quite hard to get your position and to keep it and to evolve through this path. Sure, the PhD is one step. You might finish it, but but then you have a very long process if you want to to go for an academic career. We just started this process, and we most certainly know how challenging it is. And I think, and
It's just
also
like an inverted entrepreneurship. An entrepreneurship, like you don't have any income, but like at some point you hope that you were going to leverage it, right? For us it's the opposite. You start with a steady income, but you know that at some point you'll have to find a way to get a
yeah,
position
that's true. That's true. Yeah. No, I think it's and also something important. So you put a lot of realism is in that. I tend to be too optimistic, and I think that's very good that you started like this, speaking about the PhD and really because I was going to say at the beginning, note that we both achieved our PhD. So it's a subset of people, not necessarily representative, because you have a bunch of people, a significant share, I don't know how much, who stopped the PhD and who will have potentially very different view about the PhD. So this is a discussion about between people who finished it, and so tend to,
and who are deciding to stay in academia, which is like
yeah,
another big.
right, and who enjoy it quite a
Yeah,
bit.
I think
So
we're a minority. I mean, if you look at EPFL, so
yeah,
there was a report by EPFL. So EPFL is really good about like trying to monitor their PhD students, understand what's happening,
yeah,
and I think it's beyond 70% of the ones who finished. So as you said, some of them didn't even finish, but out of the ones who finished, around 70% go to industry
mm,
afterwards, and they're
mhm,
really appreciated in industry actually. I mean, it might be a bit different in UNIL because engineers are of course appreciated. They go to R&D. A lot of them go to
yeah,
R&D like in big companies, but still, so it's only 30% who decide to stay in academia,
yeah, yeah,
and some of them end up in industry like later on. So they do a postdoc and then they're like, okay, I'm just gonna end up in industry.
okay.
So I think it's very important, yeah, to like realize not everybody just decides to stay.
Yeah, that's true. It's not necessarily for an academic career. I think it's just a difference. When I started the PhD, actually, I really wanted to do the PhD just for the sake of the PhD. I
Very
really like
nice.
doing research, and I really wanted to keep doing that. I have a glimpse during the with the master thesis and really the master in UNIL that was really oriented towards research, and really I wanted to just do it for the sake of research, and already that was very enriching. And then at the very end, actually, I thought, well, maybe let's keep going and continue with research. And yeah, it's kind of addictive, because if you like this freedom
It
and
is.
accept that sometimes the loneliness, it's very hard. Of course, you self-select there, as you said, because maybe you struggle to have a clear schedule, things that are forced on you, and you like this freedom and creativity. But now that you experience and past few years like this, it might be very hard
Even
to,
harder, yeah, to go
at,
back.
at least for me. But as we said, for others people, for other people, maybe they didn't like that, and they are looking forward going to a job where somebody give them clear guidelines. And
Yeah,
so
I mean, I'm surrounded by people like that. I mean, if you look at
right,
so with my supervisor, the last two PhDs before who finished, so like I was with them, but they're like 2 and 3 years ahead of me. They couldn't like wait to finish their PhD and to go work. So one of them went to a finance company, and she's super happy.
yeah,
And another one is working for a federal office, so she's doing
yeah,
like some research because she liked research, but
yeah,
she couldn't stand the freedom.
yeah,
She was always pissed, like annoyed at our supervisor, saying like, why is he giving me so much freedom? Like, why doesn't he tell me what he wants? You know, like she
yeah,
wanted a boss, like a real
yeah,
boss,
yeah,
telling her like, oh yeah, for next week do this, for next week do that, and like coming at 9, leaving at 5.
yeah,
And now she's loving it. So I think you should really question yourself,
yeah,
like, what kind of thing do you want
yeah.
before?
Yeah, but at the same time, you can discover it along the way. I mean, it's very interesting. I was discussing this with teaching assistants a few weeks ago, and quite often also. So how did you decided to do economics? How is it why is it your passion today, and how it becomes like that? Well, you discover many things along the way. I went to university in HEC to study economics because I wanted to do management and marketing. I really like marketing, advertisements, things like this, more visual stuff. I started first week, I saw the math class, stat class, and I fell in love with that. And I really focused on that, and I shifted my preference from all those management marketing stuff, and then I was like, well, I don't like that. Let's avoid that at all costs and focus on those things that I was really enjoying and discovering. And then up to the master, basically I really wanted to do economics. I went to the master in economics, and during the master, I discovered all the topics actually that I'm using today and that I'm fascinated about. Before, I had no clue it existed. Network theory, stuff like that, like really advanced econometrics, instrumental variable, and things about causality. It's really during the master and sometimes the last semester of the master. So it's really also along the way that you dig and you discover new things. Before going to university, I had no clue it existed. So how I could have but this aim, it was impossible. So it's interesting sometimes, and it's the
I think
same.
that's
Like,
a, that's I
yeah,
think
go
that
ahead.
that's a big problem in general. So it's funny because like one of my favorite papers in economics, like my favorite are the ones about asymmetry of information. So just like how by simply supposing that somebody has more information than the other, like the outcomes totally change. And what you were saying about orientation, there's a huge asymmetry of information problem. I remember like saying like some people would ask me, so I love teaching. I've been teaching since I finished high school and
Yeah.
tutoring and when they tell me like what's the thing that you feel you're most useful in, and I always say it's just giving information to students. You
Mm,
know, like
mhm,
when a student gets familiar with you, they feel like they're comfortable. They tell you like, I was thinking of doing this and that,
mhm.
and you tell them, like, so if you're going to do that, that's what's going to happen. This is the kind of job you can do. This is the kind of like materials you're going to study. And they're always like, oh, I didn't know that. They have
Yeah.
like cliches in their head. There's so many cliches, and like you just decide based on cliches. I don't know if that's what happened for you in marketing, but like, they
Yeah.
tell you like, oh, like when you do marketing, you need to like, I don't know, like be able to talk fast, or I don't know, like be a good presenter. Well, like not like today, maybe most jobs in marketing are data scientists who know how to analyze consumer data. So there's so many like misconceptions
Mhm.
of what a job is, and I think like there's so much room. At some point, I was thinking of like opening my company of just like advisory for
Yeah. Yeah.
for like high school students, just like telling them like what do you get if you do this and that, because we don't know, as you said, and that's why actually university is a huge path to get to know these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like you discovered statistics, you
Yeah.
discovered math, you
Mhm.
discovered research. It was the same for me. I discovered so many things I didn't know about myself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. And exactly for math and statistics, we started discussing that. And I think it's at the universities that I discovered there is something beyond just applying stuff. And it's where I always liked math, but indeed it had some limitation. But then I was really caught. I really thoughts. But I agree with the asymmetry of information and the fact that you have to learn and trying to. That's kind of the point of today, right? To
Yeah.
unveil and show it to a broader audience. What's it to be in there doing research and those type of jobs, doing a PhD. And I think that's also what we did with the students this year. Really starting by telling them, okay, cool, you're going to learn something, you enter university, and above that it's during a very specific COVID context. So let's try to put some perspective and think, okay, you're going to learn stuff, but why would you like to learn those things? Is it just to pass the exam, or is it really to go beyond? And we thought together, we presented them like, uh, let's think about the career path, what you want to achieve professionally, and so on. And I think that's super important to think about that and put what you learn in perspective of your professional life, because maybe you learn for you go to university for maybe 3 5 years, maybe 10 if you go for a PhD, and then you work for 30 years. So it's very important to think about where you will end up and what will you do with that.
Yeah, just keeping it. So I agree on everything you said. It's just like I would put a little like bémol, they say in French,
Yeah.
just not to scare people. Is like,
uh,
and I think you're the best proof of that. I mean, I always give you as an example, is that you can always change,
yeah.
because that's the thing. Also, the best way is still the best way. As much as you collect information, the best way to collect information, especially about yourself, is to try. I could
Yeah.
have never known. I thought I would be a great office worker, like that I would like the office job, like, and do interesting things. But I only realized I hate it so much when I did it. And I think you worked also in digital marketing, right, for a while, and now you're doing a PhD in econ doing research, right? So I think it's also interesting to know that yes, you need to question these things, but it's also nice to experiment, and don't feel like you have to be stuck for 30 years,
Yeah,
although it might be
thanks.
the case. So like,
Exactly. No,
I think
thank
I
you
think
very
it's
much. Because when I was finishing, actually, I had exactly this thought. Because usually I also fight against that. Because we know in the PhD, in the master in economics in University of Lausanne, it's a relatively small master compared to finance, compared to accounting, compared to marketing, and this is something we kind of trying to fight against. It's very good. I mean, the size is perfect. You can learn very well, but we also don't want people being scared without good reasons. So that's why I say we fight a bit against that. And what's happened and what we did over the last years is really there is this broad view that when you go in economics, you're not exactly sure where you will end up. But
Yeah.
there is like on one of the best hiring rates right after the master. People find jobs very quickly in a varied range of different places and fascinating jobs. But indeed, before starting, it's not necessarily clear in which places you will end up. And that's might scare some people, because if you go in accounting, you know, basically you will end up in one of those 5 big companies. If you go in HSC in accounting, you have those companies, you will end up there. And if you go in finance, it's quite clear as well your path and so on. So I think you're perfectly right to mention that, and it's very important not being scared before even starting, and learning and discovering all the things we talk about, because you don't know it exists before. So maybe you don't know even the job you will do because you don't know it exists. And I think having now a daughter and soon too, I'm thinking about that, because you know I'm doing research, and I think it was absolutely unknown when I was young that it was existing and what it was
Even
about.
existing, yeah.
Exactly, and I think there is a universe of jobs that you have no clue it exists. And sometimes I see people talking about their jobs, and you're like, "Wow, this exists. This is a job. Nobody never talked about that." And it's very interesting, I think, to keep an open mind and discover stuff. So I the link with the daughter is I wonder how I will be able to show her like plenty of opportunities and.
So, not to scare you, but like there's a nice paper by David Author that shows that I think over the last 10 years, I think they look at job openings. I think like 40% of the job openings didn't exist like 20 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
So it's not just that like you don't know all the jobs. It's that probably by the time your daughters like get to the job market, there will be jobs that didn't exist when we existed. You know, like,
Yeah, you're right. You're
so
right. You're right. Tough.
definitely you should keep an open mind. Yeah.
Yeah, tough points. Uh, that make me think also something when we talk about the PhD and research. It's a question that I had several times, and it's linked also to something you said before, being lonely and how does it work, this whole process, and trying to show it to share it to a broader audience. I had several times these questions recently, like, how do you do research? How do you start? Like, do you go to Wikipedia, and what do you do? And I think that's very interesting. So how would you answer to that if you have to like someone who had no clue about scientific research? How do you start a project? Like the first few steps you will go through.
So I think there's like many different answers to this question. So I would say there's like several aspects to it. The first one I think is like what I would call the fermentation. So it's just like letting your mind loose, right? So like allowing these bacteria to come to your head and ferment in your mind. So it could be on Wikipedia. I remember reading this very nice paper. Forgot the name of the author. He's an economist, and he said he found the best ideas for his papers in newspapers, because he said people read newspapers and I do research for things that people care about. I want my mom to be able to understand what my paper is about and why it's useful. And so, for example, he did a paper, so it's a bit old, but about like how the prices are on newspapers for like electronics compared to the prices in the stores. And he had
Mm-hmm.
this whole like theory about it. So just to say, like, so you need to let your mind wander. That's like the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, since we're like more like applied economists, you need to think about the data. Definitely, like there's a data part. Today, I think it goes way too far because like some people just construct papers based on like they want to find the perfect experiment. I mean, without going into the details of like how to do proper econometrics, but like there's so many papers about the collapse of the USSR, about the end of the Second World War, because they're like these huge shocks, and so they make you have like neat effects, but sometimes they ask questions that we don't really care about, you know. So I think there's this like trade-off, but definitely data is a big part of it. I mean, I think you would agree on that. It's like, you know, maybe I want to ask a question, like I have this amazing question I want to understand. So like now, for example, actually I'm working on trying to understand access to opportunities. You know, like there's a lot of inequality. Part of it is because of talent, because of education, but part of it is just like access to opportunities. We're talking about information.
Mhm,
A lot of
mhm,
people just have much less access to information. If you come
mhm,
from a certain background, you have much more access to information. Maybe somebody's super talented, but they don't have the right information. They end up doing something they could have done, like something much more suitable for them. And so like we're trying to analyze that, like trying to understand how much this affects like the access to success and to reduce opportunities. But then you need to find the right data, right? Like how do you measure access to opportunities? And it's super hard. It's really, really, really hard because you don't want your data to be biased.
mhm, mhm.
Like you're going to say they didn't have access to opportunity, but maybe it's also that they did less years of education. So what's the real factor? That's what we call confounding factors, right? We're like not sure of which one is the
Mhm,
important
mhm,
one. And so I think like the second step is finding the proper data for your question. So like
mhm.
first wondering, trying to find something interesting,
Yeah.
then like maybe trying to find the right data. And then I think the key part, and that's like also very personal, it's talking to people.
Mhm,
For me, research is talking to people,
mhm,
whether in conferences or like, I mean, you know that like we always end up talking like every time. Like I think you had a huge impact on my research, and like I hope I also had on yours, and I think that's how it works. It's talking to people. That's why I love also to work with co-authors. Like my co-authors are so important to me because it's talking with them that you learn stuff, that
mhm.
you get to ideas that he or she wouldn't have gotten alone, that
Yeah.
you wouldn't have gotten alone. And then like you just like, oh, what if we do that? Oh, but what about this and that? And then that's the beauty of it when you see it like building up.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agreed. It made me think about my public defense of the PhD. One of the internal Camille Terrier, the internal expert, asked me at the end just a broad question: what's kind is can you tell like kind of a big life lesson? I'm not sure how she phrased that at the end that you took from the PhD. And that was exactly this. That was alone you will do nothing. You will do very even if you publish the paper alone. I mean, how many times have we talked and spent time speaking about my single author? This is definitely not really a single author. I talked to hundreds of people about that, many hours to you, and it's fascinating. Like it's really highlighting how important, how social we are as animals, and how we have first to exchange to counterbalance this loneliness that we can face, but also to really go somewhere we need the others. And I think that's fascinating. Also, I think in science it's particularly the case because everyone is so specialized in few things that you need somebody with a slightly different view and knowledge to say, okay, but maybe you think you can think about your problem with this lens. And I think that will be perfect to link later to your research, like how people should optimally meet with their knowledge, their skills together to give the best research or best results. And I think that's, but also two other things that I wanted to jump and that you said that was so one step that I will explicitly mention is also you have the wandering. I think that's very good that you start with that. Usually I don't because I didn't really realize, but that's true that sometimes like I was in the vacation. As I said at the before the podcast together, I really didn't think about research for once. I was really relaxing. And like the last night before starting job, like at 1 a.m., I had two ideas for two different papers. And I like very clear I wanted to go in that direction and that direction. And that was and many times I like doing the dishes or things like that, and I find solutions. And I'm like doing something completely random, and I tell to Cecile, my wife, oh, I know how to do that, or I have an idea, and that's super cool. I think that's fascinating as well. This process of just finding new ideas.
Fermentation, yeah.
Yeah, and I like your way of
I mean,
framing.
I think it's really fermentation because it takes time. I think that's like the
Yeah,
key element of it,
yeah,
is you need to let things simmer in your
yeah,
head.
yeah,
And the mistake I think we all do, and I do it all the time, is thinking that like if you just think about it, if you
yeah.
didn't find a solution, there's no solution, or you will never find it.
Uh,
Like it's underestimating the ability of your brain to just like process things slowly.
mhm.
And I think that's something people in industry don't get, because in industry the whole thing is very different. Like when I tell people, oh, I've been working on this paper for 3 years, or like they're like, what? And like, how many pages is it? You're like, oh, I don't know, 20, 25. 25 pages, 3 years, like there's a problem, and it's true. When I was working in industry, like the longest term you would look at is 3 months. Like
Yeah,
we have something in 3 months. Oh, that's
yeah,
so far away.
yeah.
And like people expect things very quickly, but then it's operational. And that's the key thing about research. You need to realize it's not operational. Research
Mm,
is, I mean, there is like operational research, but also operational research. You need to, if you want
yeah.
to understand phenomena, if you want to let creativity like come in, you need to like let things sink, talk to
Mhm.
people, like let it go and come and go, and sleep a lot. Also, sleeping is very important.
Yeah, that's right. That's definitely right. So that's the best like yeah, an answer of research and mind capacity. And yeah, I perfectly share your view. And then for me, the next step after this fermentation process, as you framed it, will be reading. And indeed, people say, but do you go on Wikipedia? Of course, I go to Wikipedia. When I want to discover and to have few cues about something broadly, I have very quick answer on Wikipedia. And I think that that's very useful. I will never cite Wikipedia in an article. That's definitely off the board. But I mean, to start and explore, you have no clue or very little clue about different um, topics, and you are now interested in that because you read something in a newspaper, for example, and you want to go and see further. As I speak with my brother, again, he gave me many ideas because he speaks about current problems that he faces in conflict zone and conflict area. So then I really think, okay, that's a very interesting point of view. So let's dig, and then I see what exists in research. Usually I start like first trying to get an understanding better of knowledge on the topic, reading Wikipedia, news articles, books, things like that, really blogs or things about the topic, and like owning better this new topic. And then I will see what exists in research. Maybe it's already done. It happens to me like dozens of times. I'm like, I have the idea of the dream paper that will be fantastic. A little bit of research or talking with other people. But have you heard about that? It's already done. And
Yeah.
and it happens quite often. So then you go, and indeed then the next step I would say, and I agree with you, it's really, is there the data somewhere? Can you build a data set that will allows you to test empirically what you're trying to do, if you're doing empirical research, of course. And this is also sometimes a killer in many cases. A lot of project that I had will stop here and just remain as some lines somewhere on my computer that I might catch up someday if I find the data. And also linked to that, I think it's important to say, or I think that's something as I'm really looking for ideas this semester, as you most certainly know, for new projects, you have plenty of ideas and very few will mature and go far, and even fewer will be published. And it's very important because that's really a big topic I faced during this and discussed last semester is about failing productively. Is really in many things in life. Like the best example is really the people who are the most often rejected by top journals are those who publish the most in those journals. Is really you have to try and fail many times and learn from that to go somewhere. And I think that that's also something interesting. And I think that's something interesting in research and linked to the pros and cons of the PhD. It's really the ups and downs, because you one day you think you're you have the idea, and the day or 1 hour after everything falls and you're not sure if it will give anything after months of work. So it's really an interesting process.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you were saying actually made me think of a few things. First thing, you said that you use Wikipedia. I want to tell you about this paper. It's a paper I really like in economics of science by Neil Thompson and Hanley. And what they do is they do this amazing experiment on Wikipedia by checking actually how similar is the text of Wikipedia to what is written in scientific articles.
Yeah.
And they do this experiment where like they write Wikipedia articles,
Ah,
and they check like the ones that were written compared to the ones that were not written. It's a perfectly well done like experiment.
okay.
They did it also for econometrics, and they checked that actually when there is something on Wikipedia, like it shapes the way it's written in the text.
No.
So and it's especially useful for like things that are considered kind of common. So like that are usually taught in bachelor or masters of chemistry or bachelor or master in econometrics. And so it's like you can't know everything, right? Like you see this new tool, I don't know, like you want to check, I don't know, like two-sided the standard errors because like you have this specific data and you're like, okay, that's something's probably used a lot already, but I don't know about it. So you just go on Wikipedia and you check, okay, so that's how it works. And the way it's framed, it says, for example, oh, it's like standard errors, there are this and that.
Yeah.
And so like in your text, you're probably going to write it in a similar
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And that's how they checked. And actually, no, people do use Wikipedia. And
Yeah.
and that's what's so great about it, right? Is that
Yeah.
it's this like amazing source of knowledge.
Yeah,
I just thought it's a really nice paper called like Wikipedia Shaping Science.
very nice.
No, and
impressive. Yeah, I think you told me about that, but that's very fascinating.
And I think they do it in an amazing way. I mean, you know how we like causal inference?
Yeah.
I think they do a great job in like really like looking at all confounding factors and like doing a proper experiment.
Yeah, that's
They
so
also had
funny.
the collaboration of Wikipedia to do it.
Yeah, because when you started, it's exactly that. I was ready to attack causality, like, but you know, maybe the guys who write the articles are the one are writing or updating the articles on Wikipedia afterwards. So that's reverse causation.
No, it was like
And then
they
you're like,
got they
no,
got
but
people to do it, yeah.
yeah, so that's
And like they had like they found like 100 subjects in chemistry that are covered in masters that weren't covered in Wikipedia.
Mhm.
And so like what they did is they made people write Wikipedia articles about these 100 ones, and they put only half of them online. And then they checked over the next 3 years if they were used, and they saw that the ones that were online were much more used than the one who were, and it was totally random. And then like they ended up putting all of them online because there was a lot of criticism, like, oh, this is selective knowledge, and they were like, no, we're going to put them all online. So now all the chemistry articles are online. But I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
And it's very well done. And just the second thing about what you were saying, so this happens a lot. It's like very depressing when like you have this amazing idea, you find the data, you're like, it's great, and then you find a paper doing exactly the same. I mean, with my girlfriend, like she always comes to me and she's like, I have this amazing idea, and then like a week later she's like, oh my god, I found this paper. And what I always tell her, and it's like, that's amazing news.
Yeah.
Because it means first that you're thinking right, second that you're capable of getting amazing ideas that are capable of being published, right? Because you find it in a published paper. And if it's recent, it means like you're on the right track because it's like something that was just published now. So like you're really doing things right. And I think that's how it's supposed to be taken, and that's what you call like kind of constructive failure,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, you're on the right path. And indeed, we know that there are so many people working in research, and sometimes you have to find really the angle that have not been found yet and not studied yet. But that's the way to go. You start big. Okay, maybe this has already been solved like 10 years ago, but let's refine. Maybe there is still some shade somewhere that we have to unveil. So that's true. Very, very good example.
Yeah.
And that,
but I mean, it's sorry. I know it's just like you were saying, like a constructive failure. I think maybe entrepreneurs are even more aware of that.
Yeah.
Like when you study, like if you look at entrepreneurship studies, it's all about learning by failing.
Yeah.
Learning by failing, learning by failing. And I think in academia, we need to be aware of that too. And people need to know the more you fail, the more you succeed.
Agreed, completely agreed. And again, back to this topic that I've encountered many times, and exactly linked to that, a former colleague of mine from HEC Lausanne, who is now CEO of a gold company in Switzerland, who works fantastically well. He just published a book called Les échecs de la réussite, so the failure of how would you say that? Of success.
The failures of success.
The failure of success, which is the story of, if I'm not mistaking, of the failure of one of his early companies. And that's very cool because you see that indeed people who achieve something, who reach a certain level, usually fail many times. And also I've seen this CV from I think he's in Princeton, a professor in Princeton, who did and on the first page of his website, it's the CV of failures. And he put everywhere when he has been rejected for masters, for PhD, for grants, every paper rejected from which journals, and it's fantastic because you see exactly that. You see like, wow, this guy like achieve everything and is really successful. Yes, of course, but he failed many times before and keep failing to reach that point. And I think that it's very important to lift kind of the taboo of failure. It's very important. It's part of the
Yeah.
process. If you try nothing, you never fail.
You were mentioning actually like how much you talk to your brother, who's like in your kind of like in your field, which is amazing. I mean, it's an amazing source of
Yeah,
information, you know. There's a lot of criticism of scientists actually to be like in their ivory tower.
yeah.
They're like they just study things from above and they never go to the people that they're studying or to the things that they're studying.
Mhm.
And what I think is funny is that you are working on conflict when like your brother works in
Yeah,
conflict. And like I work on scientists and like all my family, like my brother and my parents are scientists themselves. And so I love to talk about my parents and I work a lot on medical research actually. And my
yeah,
parents are doctors.
yeah,
And so you were saying about failure and so it's so true actually because you know I was reading about the fact that in science a big problem is the under like statement or the under publication like of failing
yeah.
research.
Mhm.
So like you only publish if like you say, oh, this medicine has an effect.
Yeah,
But if you find that medicine doesn't have an effect, you don't publish it or you publish it in a very low journal
yeah,
if you have the energy to do it. And so what happens is that like nobody knows that it failed. So like so
yeah,
many people end up doing it too. So
yeah.
so much wasted effort, right?
You're right.
And so what this guy you're in Princeton you're talking about is great in doing is like he's showing look I failed all of this. It's also good to like not have this shiny view like oh look I succeeded in everything in life,
Mhm.
but no there was so much failure involved. And I think it's very important for science. It's very important for also econ research, for any kind of research to like give a space for failure.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's moving slow but hopefully it's moving like because like there needs to be a space for things that didn't work out, right?
Yeah, you're right. No, that's very important indeed. And I think you frame it really well. Then you end up doing something that's actually somebody know already that it leads nowhere. But yeah, so important point. So after that, I would be glad to listen to you about your research. What's actually what, and I'm sure everybody will be interested with all the stuff you said and are kind of curious now. But what's your research about actually? Can you summarize and maybe talk about one key papers or summarize all of them? And how you feel?
So I mean, then that's it's a tough thing to do, but I mean, I'll try to. So basically, I think what summarizes my interest in research is it started like way early on. Remember when I was saying I never knew if I wanted to do hard sciences or soft sciences, and so I ended up like doing soft sciences, studying hard sciences, because most of my research is about
Yeah,
economics of science and innovation. So the thing is like when you think about economics, and like if you tell anybody, and I'm sure it happens to you all the
yeah,
time, you say, yeah, I'm doing a PhD in econ, and they're like, oh, what do you think about inflation and like the central
yeah.
bank, and what about unemployment, right? Like that's economics, right? Like all the rest, like what are you doing actually? That's not economics. But I mean, economics is everywhere, right? Like you need economics to think about conflict, right? Because like that's sometimes the reason and sometimes the consequence of conflict.
Mhm.
And for me, it's a bit the same. You need like financing to do scientific research.
Mhm.
We had an amazing example over the last year. Like the reason why we're doing this online and we're not doing it in the same room is because of COVID, right? And so we needed to find a vaccine. So thank God
Mhm.
we found like a few now already, and treatments, improved tests. All of this requires a lot of research,
Mhm.
and all this research requires a lot of money, right? You need to finance this to pay people, but also to pay the tests, to pay for buying all the rat labs or buying all the chemical products. All of this requires money, right? So as soon as money is involved and people are involved, economics are involved. And so the idea is like, how do you finance things? And so that's kind of what I do. How do you find the right way to be fair and to be productive and to make sure that innovation works in the best way possible.
For
Uh,
research or in broader way, it will be really innovation, not really linked to academia.
so yeah, it's actually both. So I worked a lot actually on scientific research, so basic research, but also on innovation. So
Mhm.
I had some work also on patents, so more like applied kind of innovation
Mhm.
research, because there too. there's a question of like, how do you structure the system? Is the patent system a good one? Or is it actually destroying innovation because it's giving a monopoly to some people? So these are interesting questions to study. So I have a paper, for example, on applying machine learning in healthcare. And it's always the same question. It's trying to see, okay, how do we make sure that this new, like, so in innovation economics, we call it GPT, general purpose technology. So electricity, etc. So artificial intelligence and machine learning is what we call a general purpose technology.
Okay.
And so trying to understand like who are the actors and how it's working for it to be applied to healthcare, because it would be amazing, right, to have like healthcare solution that use machine learning. So that's part of my research. But so most of my research and the published work was working on scientific research. So trying to see how should the money be distributed, and so and how do researchers produce more. And so one of the things that we found is that actually already giving an incentive for researchers to apply like for grants, so they ask for money, so creating an incentive for them to work together. So as you were saying, research is a collaborative process, right? So I was working on this Swiss grant with the Swiss National Science Foundation, that is a collaborative grant called Synergia. And what you see is that when you push people to work together because they have an objective that is money, so like economics is about incentive, right? You create an incentive, and then half of them get the money and the other half doesn't. But just the fact that you created the incentive for them to work together, then two things happen. They become more productive, they have more impact for research, and they collaborate more, and they exchange knowledge. So we were, so that's when you said the creative part. I think we had like this very nice, so with my two co-authors, Fabiana Vicentini and Michele Pizzoni, we created this like way of measuring how much they're exchanging knowledge when they work together. And we find, so like when they're working together to apply for a grant, there's a lot of like exchange of knowledge happening. So there's like a lot of papers that you haven't read before, that you never cited before, that you start citing afterwards when you work with these people who used to cite it a lot. And then we see also what affects that, and we see that like what's the right distance, right? So like if you're wondering, you want to work with somebody, how do you find the right person, right? Should it be somebody who's like working on the exact same thing as you, or somebody who's really far? And so what we find, this is like a paper from 2017, we find actually if you're very close, you're probably not going to learn much, because you already know the same things. And if you're very far, you're probably also not going to learn much, because like you probably struggle to communicate. And there's this kind of like inverted U curve. So like the further you are, the better, until a certain point where like you become a bit far, and then it goes down again. So that's kind of what I work on. And now I'm like, so at Harvard, I'm working on a project to think about something bigger, not just how much you produce, but fairness, right? A big problem in society in general. Like there's all the work of Piketty, for example, showing all the inequality. There's a huge problem today within countries and among countries. And it's also the case in science. There is an amazing paper by Ball and co-authors that was very recently published in American Economic Review, talking about the lost Einsteins. So if you look at people producing patents and producing scientific research, that is what is creating all the technology that we see around us today. They're like totally overrepresented by white male and by like a certain specific regions and areas. So if you just suppose that talent is equally distributed, which is like a fair assumption, right? Like we're all like talent and intelligence is equally distributed. Then if you just suppose that it's equally distributed, and you just like distribute it fairly over women and minorities and developing countries, there's all these what they call lost Einsteins, these people who have amazing talent. They just don't have the right opportunity to produce this talent. There's another paper also by Patrick Gollet and Agraval, also recently published, looking at people in math Olympiads. And what they find is that if you're doing a math Olympiad and you perform really well, you're a gold medalist in a developed country, then like you end up doing usually PhDs, like some of them become Nobel Prize, they do great. But if you're in a developing country, usually you have much less probability of doing that, although the rate of success, so people who get the gold medal, are similar in developing and developed countries. So talent is more or less the same.
Their score, if they would have been in the same competition, they will rank similarly.
Exactly, they are, because it's internationally. So they do like similar scores. But if you're in a developing country, you just like, I mean, you do some good things in your life, but much less. And like, it's such a lost opportunity, right?
What's the break? What's the limiting factor, or the fact that they, if you have to say one factor, do you have an idea why do they not go further?
So there are several factors. The main one is
Yeah,
just there are several factors. So one of them is just money. Like
yeah,
like they need to go and education. So you were saying again, research is all about collaborations. Alone, they couldn't invent
yeah.
the I don't know like the new best thing, right? So they would need to go to certain universities. So actually, some people are trying to study. Like there were some programs in MIT to get these medalists to
Mm,
get scholarships in
mhm,
MIT,
mhm,
and they're
mhm,
checking like how they differ from people who actually didn't get
mhm,
these scholarships. So one
mhm.
thing is just that you just don't have the money or the opportunity to go to
Yeah,
best universities to get the education that allowed them to leverage
yeah.
this talent that they have and these skills that they have. Another reason is actually just knowledge. We were talking about it before. Like I noticed it a lot when I was teaching in Paris. There's a huge gap of knowledge between people inside Paris who go to the best schools and people outside of Paris, just in the suburbs, who usually go to like they call them
Mhm.
zone d'éducation prioritaire in
Yeah,
France, so like
exactly.
ZEP,
Yeah, yeah.
who like some of them are brilliant, like really, and super eager to learn. Like you couldn't say anything about them. It's not this image of like these like rebel people who don't want to learn. They're super eager to learn. They do like 1 hour of public transport to come to this class. They like everything is amazing about them. The only thing is like for them it's already a dream to just do a bachelor in like a very applied field, because that's already like unachievable. Like the best people they know around them is somebody who did like a BTS in like communication. That's like wow, that's like the best thing. But when you see them, you see their talent, their skills, you're like, dude, you can do like amazing things. You could do
Mhm,
math, you're
mhm,
like really good, you're super smart, super creative, and
mhm,
like you have to tell them for them to be confident about it and just to know about it. Like they don't even know how to apply to a math degree.
mhm,
And I
mhm.
think that's kind of a similar story for the math Olympiad winners in
Yeah,
developing countries. And so that's a project we're working on, trying to see who
yeah,
gets the information, how it gets there, and maybe how try to understand how we can make more people have access to the education, and how
yeah, that's super cool.
like all talented people. So I think these are like all interesting.
Yeah, it's really linked to the asymmetry of information. I understand even better what you said in the beginning, and I think that's fascinating and very important. And I think that's something I really witnessed with this channel, is that it gave me the opportunity to talk with students mostly from India and Africa who reach out and ask me questions. But how to enter in a PhD program? This is my idea for research, and that's fascinating. And two things I've learned from that is that most of them who reach out, who are potentially a subsample, are aiming at going to Europe for universities. So maybe linked to what you said, if you don't have the financial support to go there, it might be very difficult to exploit your potential. And the second thing I was with seeing and witnessing with several interaction is that there is a massive lack of information. Like they really don't have, or many people who reach out from those regions don't have the many information of how to apply, what do you have to do, what's the process of research. And sometimes as we grew in this environment and evolve here in Europe in good universities, it's hard to see that it's not like that somewhere else. And many, like I think now, like everything that my supervisor during my PhD, Dominique Ronner, told me is like, I cannot even put a value. It's like completely insane amount of knowledge of very subtle things that I take for granted now, but actually it was very hard to understand and to know before. And the process of research, I think there is really a massive amount of things that are untold, but everybody knows or learned after years. And I think if you are outside from that, it might be very, very hard to enter the whole this whole world. So I think it's fascinating work. Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually an amazing book called The Meritocracy Trap,
Mm,
and what they talk about is the fact that even if your parents don't give you any money, just by like the
yeah.
education and the amount of information you get. So you were talking about your supervisor, but
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
amount of information you get, like on how to get a degree, like what are the right people to talk to, the right things to do. That's like hugely valuable. It's like it amounts to millions of dollars, and we, as you said, like we just consider it as normal, and it's one of these like like unknown knowns. Like we don't even know we know it, you know,
Yeah, exactly.
and so we don't even value it, but it's actually hugely valuable.
Mhm. I think really linked to meritocracy, I really would like to talk about last topic with you is scientific research, the whole process. I mean, you study that, you evolve within this realm, and I think just to give some cues, but I would like to hear and yeah, I think there is sometimes during reading groups, people taking articles and from top scholars, and really often I've heard the comment like, it's really because of their names that they are there, that they are with these examples. I mean, they did fantastic works, but this time, it's not that good. It's really because there is this guy or that person or this woman on this paper, and and I think that's an interesting point I would like to discuss with you. And more broadly, here is the thing we could talk first. If you could explain briefly the process of publication, very briefly to upload
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I mean, I'll try to be fast. I think it's a. I mean, it deserves a
Go ahead,
podcast
start with that.
episode.
Yeah,
It deserves a podcast episode on its own. So I'm gonna steal a common saying they use for patents for the patent system, and that actually Churchill used for democracy in the first place. It's the best of the bad systems, you know. So like it's kind of so far the best that we have. So there's a lot of great things about scientific
Mm,
research. I think it's fascinating how it's organized, and all the whole publication process. It's a great like gatekeeping, right? Like because you don't want fake, like, especially now with fake news. You want like things to be checked. You want experts to be able to say, okay, this is well done. The data is well analyzed. You know, like there's no biases, or if they are, that they're clearly stated in the paper. So it's really, so it functions quite well for something so complex.
but how
Uh,
does it work? If you have to say to
so
people
very
who are
simply,
not,
it's just so like let's take a random researcher. You created this paper, you did your data analysis, and you find, for example, totally randomly, that actually the amount of weapons in a country affect the conflict in this country in a causal way, right? Then you want to publish it, so you want it to be certified. So publication is not just, so historically it was a way to have it like literally published and like put into paper and sent to people in a journal that is like a newspaper, you know. But now it's more a certification process with the internet. Like you have it as a working paper, right? So you can just put it online and everybody has access to it. But the publication process now is more like a stamp saying, okay, this was verified, peer reviewed, so
Mhm,
reviewed by peers, so
yeah.
experts said this is acceptable research and we accept it. And that's why it takes so long. So usually between the moment you send your paper, so that's what some people don't know maybe, between the time you send your paper to a journal and the time it gets published, sometimes 2 3 years pass, because like you send it, they tell you, oh, you need to change this and this and this and this and
Mhm,
that,
mhm,
and so you change it and they say, oh, but there's still this and this and this and this and that,
yeah.
and you have 2 rounds, 3 rounds, 4 rounds, sometimes 5 rounds of revision, where you're just talking with the reviewer and like sending back the things. So the process functions quite well because normally it's a double blind process. So like you don't know who your reviewers are, and they don't know who you are normally. They shouldn't know who you are when they're reviewing, so that they're totally blind to, if you're, to your gender, to your ethnicity, but also to who you are as a researcher. So like to see if they know you or not.
So in most journals, you say they hide the authorships,
Yeah, some of them don't actually. Some of them keep the authors' names.
but
So I
like
mean, I reviewed some papers where like there was the authors' names.
in top 5 journals in economics, when you
Yeah,
send the
normally like in top five, they like they don't show the author names,
to
which is, I mean,
the
normal. So
referee.
the only people who know, so yeah, the reviewers, the people who actually review the paper don't know, but the editor knows, right? Because you send them, and that's one of the main flaws.
Hmm.
Because so the thing is like, so you send it to these, so they're usually very experienced researchers who like have a like long background of publication in a journal, and so then at some point the journal said, you want to be an editor, so it's a paid position. Reviewing is unpaid, so I reviewed a lot of papers, never got paid a single dollar for it, which is fine, that's part of being a researcher. and then you like the editor is paid to like select the reviewers. So when you send your paper to a journal, you send it to this editor of the journal, and he says, okay, well, that's an interesting piece of work, and he or she does two of possible things. Either says like, oh, I don't think that's worth any reviewer time. I'm
Mhm.
just going to what they call desk reject it. And
Mhm.
in top journals, actually, most paper gets desk rejected.
Mhm.
So just like, I don't think it's good enough, just reject it. They
Mhm.
usually read like the abstract, the intro. They say, I don't think it's like revolutionary enough, or like it doesn't meet the standard of quality of the journal. So that's the thing. Like journals are ranked. There's like these top journals who consider themselves
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
very, very selective. And then you go down all the way. You have like what we call top fields. So like top journals in a certain field.
Mhm.
And then you have the top five, as you said. It's like top journals generalists in economics. So I mean, it's a very like long thing. But the thing is that you have the editor, and so the editor is who knows who you are. So suppose that the editor is like your co-author or like your friend or like just he knows you, like you're a Nobel Prize winner, right? So suppose I'm a Nobel Prize winner and then I send my paper to this editor who like is like, oh my God, it's a Nobel Prize winner. Uh, it will be much harder for him to say, oh, this research is not worth it. I'm going to desk reject it. Well, if it's just like this unknown guy from like Switzerland or whatever, or even worse, like from South Africa,
Mhm.
I mean, there's no point for me to read it even. Like, I'm just not going to send it to reviewers.
Mhm.
And so that's the thing. Although there's like part of it that's totally like objective with peer reviews, there's still like a lot of bias in it, right?
Mhm.
And so it's really hard to remove all this bias because you still like need to have some kind of like connection with the journal, right? But I think there's totally space for journals to make it a totally blind process,
Mhm.
like in a way make you like totally anonymous and like invisible to both the editor and the reviewers.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of room to do that because there's been a lot of research showing all these biases, and this bias is also visible in funding. There's what we call the Matthew effect. So it comes from Matthew, like the fact that the richer get richer. And so in science, we see that
Mhm.
the people who have the most funding are the ones who get mostly funded,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
creates a lot of like
Yeah.
inefficiency in the system.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like researchers who struggle to just ensure minimum money, and they would do much more interesting research than researchers who already have too much money to be able even to
Mhm.
manage it,
Mhm.
and they can't even manage all the projects they have because of all
Mhm.
this money. And so that's also related to this like biases, because you don't just judge the project, you judge also the people who submitted it. You judge the researcher, like, oh, this guy did like so much, or this like woman did like so much publications, she's great, I'm going to give her money. And
Mhm.
so these are like all big
Yeah.
problems in research that
Yeah.
we definitely need to fight.
I think it made me now I really have this lens. It's really also linked to asymmetry and information, right? You don't. It's costly to get information. If you get a paper, we know how many papers we read every day and we see passing by. So I think it's really a matter. Those are very simple cues of the quality of the person and potentially of the paper. So if you have those signals, basically you read it like diagonally and you're like, well, but he's a top scholar, so I think he thought about that, and let's go. So it makes sense in some way, but indeed I guess trying to double blind would be not too costly. And even I've heard this quite a lot and saw that on forums, that many desk rejections, but I don't know if it's true. It's maybe from the people getting the desk rejected. Um, it's just based on my affiliation. Like I come from, as you said, from a university that's unfortunately unknown, and maybe the one that are unknown and those outside the US, and that's just why I've been desk rejected. And I think so double blinding also the affiliation and grants and things like that maybe. But why is it not done? What do you think?
I mean, I think there's I don't know, I think it's the like the editor needs to have um I don't know, a view of who you are. I don't know exactly. I remember somebody actually explaining to me like why it's very hard to change it.
Mm-hmm.
uh I think that's how like the process has been done so far. And like the editor always was your contact point, so they need to know who you are, right, to send you an email, to like
Yeah.
to talk to you. But I think it's possible to anonymize it. I think with the tools that we have today,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
possible
yeah,
to just anonymize the process and make it. The thing is, like, it's still like still won't be perfect for two reasons. The first one is with all the seminars, the conferences, it's very likely that both actually the editor and the reviewers have seen the paper somewhere,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
they
Right.
know who you are.
Yeah, if you are in the
Uh,
fields, you kind of know who is working on that. You know, you're
exactly,
right. You're right.
exactly, and like it already happened to me. Like I got a paper to review,
Yeah,
and I knew who were the
yeah,
authors. I mean, just by the title because I saw it in a couple of
yeah,
conferences,
yeah.
and so it's really hard to manage that. So it's like there's a limit to it, um,
Sure.
and
People
and
self-citing also, like you cite your previous work and you really built
exactly.
on
So
that, and you tend to kind of see it. That was you were going to say, or
yeah, exactly. So like there's a lot of ways to read into a
yeah.
paper,
Mm.
and know who has written it. So
If you have
it's
confidence intervals or something, you know, you know who might have wrote with confidence intervals in
yeah,
any.
you're like quite sure. You're like, okay, there's like five people who could do that because they have this data, and like
Uh,
I yeah, I mean it's really tough. I was yeah, I mean I don't know, but like editors also like have a lot of work. They have a very tough job to do,
yeah,
and it's true that sometimes it's easier for them to just select, as you said, on like some
yeah.
observables.
Yeah, I mean it's the same way when you hire someone. Like you get, for example, for hiring RAs or teach research assistant or teaching assistants, something that's just what you call in economics a signal. Basically, it gives an information. But it's not a perfect signal. Are the grades, and it's very cheap. And it's not perfect to capture the capacity of somebody to teach then and to do research. But it's very simple if you have hundreds applications to go through the grades, and let's say, okay, below these thresholds of really top grades, you just don't look at it. And it's a bit sad, but I think it's also part of the reality, because I cannot really criticize the literature, because I'm doing that when I'm hiring. I have to set a threshold, and usually for the teaching assistants, we had they had to have a six in the field, in the class they will help with. And I think it's a good signal. It correlates very, very well with the capacity of the students and the knowledge of the students, but as well between 5.5, for example, and 6 on 6 scale, the person might be a bit different. They are the person who will like devote 100% of their energy to studying and who will get the 6, as those who might get 5.5. Maybe they are really interested in the things, but also in the application, and they are reading and they are knowing plenty of stuff that might be very useful as well for the students. And they get, but yeah, it's not a perfect signal, just to
Yeah,
clear.
I mean, and there's another bias actually that was like recently uh, shown actually, is that even the way you write gives a signal about
Yeah.
where you are and where you come from. So there's a paper actually still not published, showing that even if you don't know who it is, there's still a bias against women
Mm.
because they have a different style, different way of writing. It's by Fiona Murray and co-authors. Um, and so like he's still limited. Like I mean, you can only tend toward more objectivity, but for sure, people who come from top schools in a similar way, they have a certain way of writing, which the editor will like very reasonably and like very like objectively think that this is quality writing. They wouldn't think that they're doing any kind of discrimination doing that. They would be
Hmm.
like, oh,
Hmm.
that's well written, but
Hmm.
probably they have a bias towards people who write in a certain style,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
top university style.
But
And
yeah,
so
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think if basically you are, let's say you are used to, you are used to read top papers written in a style, but you don't know or perceive that it's because it has been written by white male, let's say, in the past. So you are used to this language, and maybe, yeah, I understand. That's kind
yeah,
of,
I mean, that's a huge problem. And actually, it's funny because there's also this problem in machine learning. Like the
yeah,
algorithms are becoming
yeah,
biased because so much of the learning data set is done by a certain type of people.
yeah, yeah,
So I mean, all these are like interesting challenges that
yeah.
we face as researchers. But hopefully, I mean, we can also make a change.
Yeah, and I think to kind of close the discussion, I think it's very interesting also to see research evolving. I mean, I'm not sure how objective I am, but I think that there is really this willingness to share more and more knowledge. I think I see more and more YouTube channels, press release from research, university really trying to push forward these communications, professor doing that, and trying to give it to the broad public, to the news, to the politicians. I think that's fantastic. I think that's really something that's much needed. Yeah.
Yeah, and so as you said, there's a double push actually, and I think that's really great.
Mm,
So there's a push, as you said, on the side of researchers. So like you, I mean, I think you're an amazing example with your channel. And so it's like really like I would say like researcher push in a sense. They're like they want to do these things, they want more purpose instead of just feeling that their work is read by 5 people in the world who can understand it. And they want to go beyond. They want to do like large scale things, like making all this knowledge accessible. And
mhm.
some of it, and this is I think a great news is I would say like university pull or institution
Yeah.
pull. So in France and the UK, I don't know other examples so far, but probably there's a lot of others. So for people who don't know, for us, like we have le parcours du combattant for researchers. Like when you finish your PhD, then you might do a postdoc, and then like when you get a professorship for like 6 years, or it depends on the university, but like for a certain number of years, you're what we call tenure track. So you're like on probation, you have like these 6 years to prove yourself, and if you like reach a certain number of objectives, then you're confirmed and you become finally a full professor, like an associate professor, a part of like the university really, and like you get like a full position. And so historically it was more about, so what you said, like classical signals, like, oh, how many top fives do you have, how many publications, how many
Mhm,
citations.
mhm,
So
mhm,
like you would look at the signals, maybe look a bit about what your research is about.
mhm.
um, but now they're like including other things to it. So I know
Mhm,
that in the UK, so I was recently in Exeter, and I know that a lot of like in Warwick, like a lot of like UK universities put so like a very clear like a grading system or somehow like appraisal system, where 20% is what they call like community work. So like your channel would definitely fit in that, writing
mhm,
blogs, newspaper articles, so like general public things.
mhm,
So really like making your research reaching a larger number of people. So
mhm.
that's like 20% of your
Wow.
evaluation.
Okay.
And there's another like 20% on your teaching, because so far teaching has
Mhm.
been so not considered. Like you can be the most horrible teacher in the world. If you have the number of publications, it's okay, you're tenured.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, we both love teaching,
Yeah.
and I think that's a big problem. Like
Yeah.
teaching needs to be more valued, and because
Yeah.
it's a big part of our work as professors and as researchers. And so I think there's some movement. I know in France, also in PSE, in Paris School of Economics, now they impose like you need to have a certain number of what they call like general public things, so like
Uh,
blogs,
yeah.
podcasts are actually a big thing now.
Mhm.
I mean, the
Good
proof
to
is
know.
what we're doing now.
Good first start for us.
So yeah, I mean, hopefully this one will be a big one. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. No, thank you very much. As usual, I learned a ton, so much, and I just have so much fun talking with you and exchanging.
likewise.
I'm really thank you so much, and really for everything you share. And I'm super glad today to be able to share this with a broader range of people, and with the audience of the channel, and LinkedIn contacts, because I really learn so much each time. So I'm really glad to share this passion with you, and today to share it a bit further. So thank you very much, Charles. Looking
I
forward
mean, thank
chatting
you.
with
It's a great honor.